I heard him laugh, and that was the moment everything I thought I knew about my life cracked straight down the middle. It wasn't a cruel laugh, that's the part that still gets me. It was the comfortable kind, the laugh of a man who believed he was completely alone, completely safe, completely untouchable. My husband of 4 years was standing in our kitchen at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, and I was supposed to be asleep. I'd gotten up for a glass of water because the baby had been pressing on my bladder all evening, and I was 28 weeks pregnant and exhausted in a way that I didn't know was possible before this pregnancy. I had one hand on the wall for balance and the other on my stomach, and I stopped moving the second I heard his voice drop to that low, conspiratorial register that I'd never once heard him use with me. "She won't find out," he said. "She trusts me completely." That's always been her problem. I stood there in the dark hallway in my socks and I did not breathe. My name is Cecily, I'm 31 years old. I work as a licensed pharmacist at a hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina, and until that night, I thought I had built a genuinely good life. I had a husband I loved, a house we'd renovated together, a baby girl coming in 11 weeks. I had a mother-in-law who texted me recipes, and a father-in-law who called me kiddo and meant it warmly. I thought I was lucky. I thought I'd done everything right. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, the daughter of a high school history teacher and a woman who ran the books for a small trucking company. We weren't wealthy, but we were stable, and my parents had this marriage that I always described to people as quietly extraordinary. 40 years of choosing each other every single day without making a production of it. That was what I wanted. That was what I thought I had. I met my husband at a friend's wedding 6 years ago. He was charming in this unhurried way, not flashy, just steady and warm and present. His family had money. His father had built a regional logistics company from nothing and done very well with it, but he never led with that. He was the kind of man who remembered what you'd said 2 weeks ago and asked about it. He remembered that I'd mentioned my grandmother was having knee surgery, and the next time I saw him, he asked how she was recovering. I fell for him the way you fall for someone when you're not expecting it. Slowly at first, and then all at once, and then it was too late to do anything about it. We got married 4 years ago in September, in the backyard of his parents' home outside Asheville. It was beautiful. His mother cried. My father gave a toast that made everyone laugh and then go quiet in a tender way. I was 37 days away from turning 28, and I thought, this is it. This is the foundation. Everything builds from here. I got pregnant 8 months ago. It wasn't easy. We'd been trying for almost 2 years, and I'd started to quietly make peace with the possibility that it might not happen for us. And then it did, and it was a girl, and my husband cried in the parking lot of the OB's office and held my face in both hands and said, "Cecily, we did it." I thought that was the realest I'd ever seen him. His parents were thrilled. His mother started sending me links to nursery furniture within 48 hours. His father called and talked for 20 minutes about how he couldn't wait to teach her to fish. His older brother, who lives about 40 minutes from us with his wife, who I'd always found a little cold but had tried hard to like, sent flowers to the house. A big arrangement. Peonies, which I love. I thought, maybe I've misjudged her. Maybe this baby is the thing that pulls us all closer. That was 3 months ago. I stood in that hallway and I listened to my husband's half of a phone conversation that lasted 11 minutes, and by the end of it, I was a different person than I had been when I walked out of our bedroom. Here is what I understood, in pieces, the way you understand something catastrophic, not all at once, but in a sequence of small, terrible recognitions. My father-in-law had a clause in his estate plan. His primary assets, the company, the property, the investments, everything that amounted to somewhere north of $4 million, were structured to pass to his sons jointly, but with a condition. His older son, my brother-in-law, had to have a biological child by his 55th birthday, or his share reverted entirely to my husband. My father-in-law was old-fashioned about legacy in a way I'd always found slightly sad but harmless. He'd never said anything unkind to me, but he believed in this quiet and unbudging way that inheritances should follow bloodline. My brother-in-law's wife, my sister-in-law, the one who sent the peonies, could not have children. They'd known this for years. They had tried, and then they had stopped trying, and I had assumed, without ever asking directly, that they had made peace with it. I had assumed wrong. They had not made peace with anything. They had, instead, made a plan, and my husband was part of it. The plan, as I stood in that dark hallway and reconstructed it from one side of a phone call, was this: when our daughter was born, they would tell me she was stillborn. There was a doctor involved, someone my brother-in-law knew, someone who had apparently agreed to this for reasons I couldn't fully absorb while standing in my socks at midnight, who would manage the medical side of things. My sister-in-law would, shortly thereafter, announce a pregnancy, quietly. A surprise. My daughter would be raised as their biological child, and my brother-in-law would meet the terms of his father's estate, and my husband would receive a payment. I heard a number. I heard it clearly. I heard him confirm it twice. Of $350,000. My daughter. My baby girl. The one I'd spent 8 months talking to, singing to, worrying about, planning for. I went back to the bedroom. I did not get the glass of water. I lay down in the dark and I stared at the ceiling and I thought very carefully about what I was going to do. Here is something about being a pharmacist that people don't always understand. The job requires a specific kind of precision. You do not guess. You do not approximate. You verify, and then you verify again, and then you document everything, because in my profession, the gap between what you assume and what you know can hurt someone. I had spent 8 years training myself to be exact, to be patient, to build a complete picture before I acted on it. I did not say anything to my husband the next morning. I made coffee. I asked him how he'd slept. I watched his face and I felt something settle in me that was not calm exactly, but was focused, surgical. I called in sick to work that day, which I almost never do. I sat at the kitchen table after he left, and I wrote down everything I had heard, every phrase, every pause, every name, and then I started to think about what I was going to need. I needed documentation. I needed to be able to prove not just what I'd heard but what was planned, in a way that couldn't be dismissed as a misunderstanding or a hormonal pregnant woman who'd overreacted to something she half heard in the dark. My husband kept financial records in a shared drive that we'd set up when we bought the house. He'd mostly forgotten I had access to it. We'd used it for contractor bids and insurance documents, and it had just sort of stayed there. I opened it that afternoon and I spent 3 hours going through what was in it. There were wire transfer confirmations. Not labeled clearly, but I know how to read a financial document, and I know what it means when money moves from one account to another in a pattern that doesn't match any legitimate expense. There were 2 payments, each $25,000, to an account I didn't recognize, going back 18 months. There was an email thread he'd accidentally saved as a PDF. I think he'd meant to delete it, that was between him and his brother, and which was, when I read it, almost clinical in how clearly it laid out what they intended to do. I forwarded everything to an email address I created that afternoon on a device he didn't know I had, an old tablet I used for reading that wasn't connected to any of our shared accounts. I printed what I could at the FedEx office 3 miles from our house, paid cash, and put it in an envelope that I kept in the lining of my hospital bag. My hospital bag that I'd already packed, that I'd packed with such hope. I called my mother that evening from my car, parked in a grocery store lot. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time, which is not like her. My mother is not a woman who does silence. And then she said, "Cecily, you listen to me. You do not go home and pretend everything is fine by yourself. You call someone official, and you do it now." I told her I needed a little more time. I needed to be methodical. She hated that, but she understood it because she raised me. Over the next 3 weeks, I became someone I didn't entirely recognize. I was warm to my husband. I asked his mother to go shopping with me for nursery things, and I sat with her in a baby furniture store, and we picked out a dresser, and she put her hand over mine and said she was so glad I was part of their family, and I looked at her and wondered how much she knew. I still don't know the answer to that. I hope it was nothing. I genuinely hope she was just a woman buying a dresser. I reached out to a lawyer, a woman my mother found through a friend, someone who specialized in family law but who had also, in a previous part of her career, worked as a prosecutor. I met with her twice in her office on my lunch breaks, and I put the envelope on her desk and watched her face while she read through it. She looked up at me when she finished. "You're sure about this?" she said. "I've been sure for 3 weeks," I said. I needed the paperwork to catch up. She made a call that afternoon. By the end of that week, I was talking to a federal agent. What my husband and his brother had planned wasn't just ethically monstrous, it crossed into federal territory in ways they apparently had not thought through. The doctor involved had a license: medical fraud, conspiracy, identity fraud for a minor. The agent who met with me was very measured and very careful about not overpromising anything, but she was also very clear that what I'd brought her was serious. They asked me to go home, to keep acting normal, to give them time to build the case properly. I went home, I kept acting normal. I want to be honest about what that period was like, because I think people imagine that kind of situation as either heroic or straightforward, and it was neither. It was dinner conversations and Saturday errands and prenatal checkups where my husband sat next to me and held my hand while they measured our daughter's heartbeat, and I would look at the ceiling and focus on her, just her, and remind myself what I was doing this for. There were moments when I almost said something, when I'd watch him sleep and feel this grief rise in me that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the specific loss of who I'd thought he was. I had loved him. I want to be clear about that. What I felt in those weeks was not just anger, it was also mourning. The mourning of a marriage I thought I was in, the mourning of a version of my life that turned out to be a story I'd told myself. The hardest night was about 6 weeks in. I was 34 weeks pregnant, and I couldn't sleep, and I went to the nursery and sat in the glider we'd bought together, and I talked to my daughter for a long time. I told her that I was going to protect her, that I knew what was happening and I wasn't going to let it, that she was wanted, genuinely, deeply wanted, and that the people who were supposed to protect her had failed, but that I had not and I was not going to. I think I needed to say it out loud. I think I needed to hear my own voice in that room. 4 weeks before my due date, the agent called and told me they were ready. They had enough between what I'd provided and what they'd built independently. They needed one more thing from me. When I went into labor, I needed to text a specific number, and they would have people at the hospital. Will she be safe? I asked. I didn't mean me. That is the priority, she said. That is the only priority. I went into labor on a Sunday morning in March at 5:42 a.m. My husband was beside me, calm in the way that people are calm when they think they know how something is going to end. I texted the number from the bathroom before we left the house. I remember sitting on the edge of the tub and hitting send and thinking, okay, now we finish this. Labor was long, 14 hours. Somewhere around hour 9, with my mother, who I had quietly arranged to be there, who my husband thought was just a nervous grandmother. Sitting on my left side and my husband on my right, I looked at the ceiling and I breathed and I thought about the dresser we'd picked out. The small white one with the round knobs. I'd already put her blankets in the top drawer. She was born at 8:17 in the evening, 7 pounds, 2 ounces. She had a full head of dark hair, and she cried immediately, which the nurse said was a great sign, and they put her on my chest and I felt something that I don't have adequate language for. Not relief exactly, though there was relief. Something older than relief. Something that felt like bedrock. 2 hours later, there were federal agents in the hospital. I was not in the room when they arrested my husband. I was in a postpartum room with my daughter on my chest and my mother next to me, and I heard some commotion in the hallway and then nothing, and then a nurse came in and closed the door quietly and looked at me with an expression that was professional and kind and said, "Can I get you anything?" "No," I said. "I have everything I need." My brother-in-law was arrested at his home the same night. The doctor who had agreed to participate lost his license within the week, pending further investigation. My sister-in-law was charged as a co-conspirator, which the lawyer told me was something I shouldn't have to fight for, because the evidence made it clear she had been involved from the beginning. Some of the people on the internet who heard about this story later were angry that she was included, and I understand that, but I also know what was in those emails. I know what she wrote. I am not interested in softening that. My father-in-law did not know. I found that out much later, through the lawyer. He found out the same way I did, through information he wasn't supposed to have, and from what I understand, it broke something in him that I'm not sure will fully heal. I don't know how to feel about that. I feel some sorrow for it, and I also feel that none of this was my fault, and I try to let both things be true at the same time. My mother stayed with me for 6 weeks. She slept in the second bedroom and she brought me water at 2 a.m. And she held my daughter so I could shower, and she did not even once say "I told you so," which she absolutely could have. My own father drove up the second weekend and sat on the floor of the nursery and introduced himself to his granddaughter with a formality that made me laugh for the first time in what felt like months. "Hello," he said very seriously to a 10-day-old baby. "I'm going to be someone very important in your life. I hope you'll be patient with me while I figure out how to do that." I named her Vera. It means truth in Latin, and also in Russian, and also in several other languages that I looked up because I wanted to be sure it carried weight in more than one direction. Her middle name is the same as my mother's, a name that has been passed down in our family for 3 generations, and which I refuse to write here because it belongs to her. Vera is 4 months old now. She has opinions about which direction she prefers to face in her career, and she has recently discovered her own hands with an intensity that I find both charming and scientifically impressive. She sleeps in the small white dresser's room, under the blankets I put in that top drawer weeks before she arrived. The divorce is in process. My lawyer is handling it with a thoroughness that I find deeply satisfying. The house, which I can keep if I choose, and which I am choosing to keep, at least for now, has a backyard that I've started thinking about differently. Less as a project to finish and more as a place to grow things in. I didn't tell this story for sympathy, though I understand if that's how it lands. I told it because I spent 11 weeks of my pregnancy carrying it alone, partially alone, before I told my mother, and then less alone, and then not alone at all, and there was something almost unbearable about that silence. About knowing what I knew and having to function inside a house that had become a stage set. If you are reading this and you are carrying something heavy and you are asking yourself whether you can trust what you heard, what you saw, what you know in the parts of yourself that don't lie to you, I am telling you, you can. The precision that I brought to my marriage unraveling wasn't coldness, it was love. It was everything I refused to let them take. I stood in a dark hallway in my socks and I heard the truth, and then I spent 11 weeks making sure the truth had teeth. Vera is asleep right now in the other room. She makes a small sound when she's in the deep part of sleep, not quite a sigh and not quite a hum, and sometimes I stand in the doorway just to hear it. That sound is the whole world, and it's mine.